Greetings and salutations, my dear audience. This is Joe Saint, Eggbenedictus, coming at you with a brief discussion on the problem with the parentheses. I was doing my devotional reading this past day or two, and I was on 1 Peter chapter 4. This particular version is the New Jerusalem Bible, or the Jerusalem Bible, not the new one. And I was reading 1 Peter 4, think of what Christ suffered in this life, and then arm yourselves with the same resolution that he had. Anyone who in this life has bodily suffering has broken with sin, because for the rest of his life on earth, he is not ruled by human passions, but only by the will of God. That really hit me, because I know that people don't like to suffer. And I realized that as a Christian, we make decisions in which we deny ourselves, in which we pick up our crosses, in which we, forego things that would lead us off of our journey with Jesus. And this particular verse is extremely important because it lends itself to the idea that we are called in some sense, to really put ourselves aside. And then if you come down here, it continues, so people cannot understand why you no longer hurry off with them to join this flood, which is rushing down to ruin, and then they begin to spread libels about you. I thought to myself, why is it that I really never saw this verse? Or another way to put it, how come it didn't hit me the same way again? Well, as many of you know, I'm an NRSV fan, and if you turn in the NRSV, this, by the way, is the NRSV updated edition, you will notice in the NRSV or the NRSV updated edition, 1 Peter chapter 4, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has finished with sin. Notice the parentheses. If you're reading devotionally or just reading in any sense of normal reading, as you would any other book, which when we have to admit and be honest, if we're reading the Bible, sometimes we read it in a way that gets into a flow like any other book. You're going to really skip over that. And not only that, but if it's parenthetical, you would read it, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention, for whoever suffered in the flesh is finished with sin, so as to live the rest of your time in the flesh, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. The parenthetical phrase disconnects the sense with the rest of these two verses, verse 1 and 2. And to me, because of that, it downplays or at least robs the verse from the power that it could potentially have for devotional reading. And then down here it says they are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. Dissipation, kind of a old-fashioned word. I'm not even sure what it means. And the blasphemy, again, is like a libel. So I think the Jerusalem Bible gets at more of the spiritual lesson here. I was comparing it with a King James Version just to see how that turned out. This is my Expositor's New Testament. It's from some dude a long time ago. And if you look at it, it says, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind as Christ. And then, for he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. No parentheses in the King James Version. That he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lusts of men. In the flesh is much better than dissipations. So, of all of these particular versions, the New Testament, King James Version, the Jerusalem Bible, I'm going to check the NIV in a moment, but NRSV doesn't do so good. Let me grab an NIV and go from there for a moment. I'll be right back. Alrighty, I'm back. Got my NIV here. Turn to 1 Peter 4. Move that out of the way. It's hard to do everything with one hand, but I really hate having to do the propping for this camera. It's really annoying. I gotta like move everything on my desk out of the way, and it's terribly annoying. So I'd rather just do one hand and be inconvenienced for a minute. All right. 1 Peter. Okay, here we go. 4. There we go. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. The done there is okay. I still like the Jerusalem Bible better. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. Again, I still think the Jerusalem Bible is spot on here. And just to compare it, so you don't have to rewind the video, we'll read it again. See how this flows devotionally, I think, for the better. Think of what Christ suffered in this life, and then arm yourselves with the same resolution that he had. Anyone who in this life has bodily suffered has broken with sin. I really love that word. Because the rest of his life on earth, he is not ruled by human passions, but only by the will of God. And the because is there to connect it. I think it's a winner. That just, for me, kind of shows a kink in the NRSV view, because there is a problem with the parentheses.
There's a cat.